It was December 15, 2017, a Friday. The streets of Manhattan were filled with the usual hustle and bustle. Tourists and locals alike crowded the sidewalks, moving quickly, some chatting excitedly, others rushing to finish their holiday shopping. The sound of honking taxis filled the air as the city seemed alive with energy. Snow had begun to fall, small white flakes drifting down to coat the sidewalks, and the city lights sparkled like stars in the cold night. In the distance, the giant Rockefeller Christmas tree stood tall, its lights shining bright, adding a festive glow to the otherwise freezing air. Amid all of this, Keanu Reeves walked quietly through the crowd. He wore a simple black coat, a dark scarf wrapped snugly around his neck, and a pair of worn boots that seemed well-loved. He didn't stand out much, just another person in the crowd, moving with the same hurried pace as everyone else. For most people, he was just another face among the sea of holiday shoppers. And that was exactly how Keanu liked it, quiet, unassuming, blending in. Keanu had just bought a hot dog from a street vendor, savoring the warmth from the food as he took a small bite. He had only taken a few steps when a loud, high-pitched voice pierced the air. It was a child's voice, panicked and full of urgency. "Don't eat that." The words were so sudden and sharp that Keanu froze mid-bite. He looked around, trying to see who was speaking. To his surprise, he saw a boy standing a few feet away. The child looked no older than 9. His face was dirty, streaked with smudges, and his large hoodie hung loosely on his small frame as though it was much too big for him. The boy's hands were shaking, and his wide eyes were filled with fear and something else, desperation. He was trembling, his gaze locked on Keanu, and there was something in his eyes that made Keanu's heart ache. Keanu lowered the hot dog slowly, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with concern. The boy hesitated for a moment, his lip trembling before he spoke. "It's poisoned," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. The boy was speaking urgently, and it was clear that he believed what he was saying. Keanu was stunned for a moment. "Poisoned?" he repeated, trying to understand. "How do you know that?" The boy hesitated, looking nervously over at the vendor. His eyes darted back and forth as if he was scared to say too much. I just know," he said, his voice shaking. "Please, don't eat it. It's poisoned." Keanu's mind raced. Was this just a scared child making up a story? Or was there something more serious going on? He looked down at the hot dog in his hand, then back at the boy, whose wide eyes pleaded for Keanu to listen. There was something in the boy's voice, a rawness, a vulnerability, that made Keanu feel a sense of urgency. He didn't want to ignore the boy. Keanu lowered the hot dog and crouched down to the boy's level. "It's okay," he said gently, trying to calm him. "Let's figure this out together. What's your name?" The boy looked up at Keanu with a mixture of fear and hope. "Luke," he whispered. "I wasn't lying, I swear." Keanu gave him a reassuring nod, but his mind was still racing. He glanced over at the vendor, who was visibly sweating now, his face pale. "I don't know what this kid's talking about," the vendor said, his voice shaking. "My food's clean. I swear." Keanu stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving Luke. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said in a calm, steady voice. He handed the hot dog back to the vendor, then pulled out a $100 bill from his pocket. "How about you go get yourself something warm to eat, Luke? You look like you could use it." Luke shook his head fiercely. "I don't want your money," he said, his voice cracking. "I just want you to believe me. Please just listen to me." Keanu's heart softened as he saw how desperate the boy was. He crouched down again and gently placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. "I'm listening," he said softly. "Tell me what's going on." Luke hesitated for a moment, his lip quivering as he tried to find the right words. Then, in broken sentences, he began to speak. His voice was soft, but there was an undeniable urgency in his words. "I saw the man," Luke said, "the one who gave the vendor money earlier. He paid him in cash and said something about sending a message." Luke's voice faltered, his hands shaking. "I was hiding, hoping for some food. I didn't know what to do, but then I saw you and I thought maybe you'd believe me." Keanu's mind was spinning. Could this be true? Was Luke just a scared child telling a story? Or was there something bigger going on? Keanu's instincts, the same ones that had always guided him to help others, told him to trust the boy. The urgency in Luke's voice, the fear in his eyes, it was real. Keanu decided to believe him. "Come with me," Keanu said, his voice steady. He reached out his hand to the boy. Luke hesitated for a moment, his small, dirt-covered hand hovering uncertainty, but then he reached out and took Keanu's hand. Together, they walked down the busy street toward a nearby diner. Keanu hoped they would be able to figure things out there in a safe and warm place. Inside the diner they found a booth in the corner. Keanu slid in first and Luke hesitated before sitting down beside him. The diner was warm and the smell of coffee and food filled the air, but Luke didn't seem to notice. He was still shaking, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Keanu ordered 2 hot chocolates, hoping the warmth of the drink would help calm the boy down. As they waited for their drinks, Luke began to open up more about his life. He told Keanu how his mother had disappeared when he was much younger, and how people sometimes said strange things about her when they didn't think he was listening. The more Luke spoke, the more Keanu understood that this wasn't just about the hot dog, it was about something much bigger. Luke's life had been filled with pain and loss, and he had been trying to survive on his own for far too long. Before they could talk more, the door to the diner opened, and a man in a black coat stepped inside. He scanned the room with cold eyes, and as soon as he saw Luke, his gaze locked onto the boy. Luke's body tensed, and he clutched Keanu's arm so tightly that it left marks. "That's him," Luke whispered, his voice shaking. "The man I saw talking to the vendor." Keanu felt his muscles tense. The man in the black coat was tall, his face shadowed, and there was something dangerous about him. The air in the diner seemed to grow thick with tension. Keanu knew that this wasn't just about Luke anymore. This man was connected to something bigger, something dangerous. Luke's grip on Keanu's arm tightened, and Keanu could feel the boy's fear. "Stay close to me," Keanu said softly, trying to comfort Luke. "You're safe. I promise." Luke didn't say anything but kept clinging to Keanu's arm. Keanu scanned the room, noticing that everyone was watching, but no one seemed brave enough to step in. The man in the black coat took slow, deliberate steps toward their table, his boots clicking loudly on the tile floor. Well, the man said, his voice low and smooth. "This is an interesting twist. Didn't expect to find you here, Reeves?" Keanu's heart sank. This man knew who he was. But how? And why? "Leave the kid alone," Keanu said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. The man smirked. "Oh, I'm not here for the kid," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to Luke before settling back on Keanu. "He's just collateral. But you've got something I need." Keanu's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice sharp now. "And you're not getting anywhere near this kid." The man's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Pity," he said, his voice turning cold. "I thought we could do this the easy way." Before Keanu could react, the man reached into his coat, and Keanu's heart nearly stopped. But before the man could do anything, the diner door opened once more, and 2 police officers stormed inside, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one of the officers shouted. The man froze, his eyes narrowing in anger as he slowly raised his hands. Keanu breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly wrapped his arm around Luke, pulling him closer to shield him. The officers moved swiftly, handcuffing the man and leading him out of the diner. As they passed by, one of the officers paused and looked at Keanu. "We've been looking for this guy for weeks," the officer said. "Looks like you just helped us catch a dangerous criminal." Keanu nodded, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "Glad I could help," he said quietly. But as the man was led away, Keanu looked down at Luke. The boy was still shaking, his face pale and his eyes full of fear. "You're safe now," Keanu said softly, kneeling down to meet Luke's gaze. "I promise no one's going to hurt you." But Luke didn't seem convinced. "They'll come back," Luke whispered, his voice barely audible. "They always come back." Keanu's heart broke for the boy. He knew there was more going on than just the man in the diner. This was bigger. Luke had been through so much already, and Keanu couldn't leave him alone to face it. "They won't come back," Keanu said firmly, his voice full of quiet determination. "Not while I'm here." For the first time, Luke's face softened. A small flicker of hope appeared in his eyes, and Keanu knew without a doubt that he wouldn't leave this boy behind. He would protect him no matter what. As they left the diner and stepped back out into the cold night, Keanu's mind was filled with questions. Who was Luke really? What secrets was he hiding? Whatever the answers were, Keanu knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let Luke face this alone. "Do you trust her?" Luke asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Keanu didn't even hesitate. "With my life," he replied firmly. "Maya's one of the best people I know." Luke looked like he was trying to believe that, but he still had worry in his eyes. The fear wasn't gone yet. Maya returned to the room holding 2 mugs of steaming Coke. She handed one to Luke, who took it with both hands, whispering a soft thank you as he slowly brought it to his lips. Maya sat down beside Keanu, her face serious. "All right, tell me what's going on," she said in a low voice. "Don't leave anything out." Keanu took a deep breath and began to tell Maya everything that had happened from the very beginning, starting with the poisoned hot dog. He explained the strange man they saw in the diner and the way the man acted. Keanu also told Maya about Luke's strange behavior and his fear of being followed. Every once in a while, he looked over at Luke to make sure he was okay with what he was saying. Luke didn't say anything, but his eyes looked like they were holding back a storm of emotion. When Keanu finished telling the story, Maya leaned back in her chair, her face thoughtful. She frowned, clearly thinking hard about everything Keanu had said. After a long pause, she spoke again. "These people, whoever they are, they're not just random people," Maya said. "They're clearly after something. They think Luke has it." Luke flinched when Maya said that. He shook his head quickly like he was trying to push away the thought. "But I don't have anything," he said, his voice trembling. Maya reached over and put a hand on his knee. "I believe you," she said kindly, looking into his eyes. "But that doesn't mean they'll stop looking for it. We need to figure out why they think you're important." Keanu nodded in agreement. "It's something about Luke's parents," he said slowly. "There's something they were involved in. We need to figure out what they left behind, something that might explain why these people are after Luke." Luke's face looked like he was about to break down. His grip on the mug tightened and his voice cracked when he spoke. "I just want to be left alone," he whispered. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be part of this crazy mess." Keanu's heart ached as he listened to Luke's words. He had been through difficult times too, times when he felt so alone and wished someone would help him. That's why he was here now. That's why he was doing everything he could to protect Luke. Keanu crouched down next to the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know, buddy," Keanu said gently, his voice soft and comforting. "I know it's hard. But we can't ignore this. We have to face it together. You're not alone in this." Luke's eyes filled with tears and he looked up at Keanu. "But why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. "You don't even know me. Why are you doing this for me?" Keanu felt his throat tighten as he thought about his own childhood. He had been alone for so long, wishing for someone to be there for him. He knew how lonely it felt. That's why he was helping Luke. He couldn't let Luke go through this by himself. Keanu took a deep breath and looked Luke in the eyes. "Because I know what it's like to feel all alone," he said softly. "And I don't want anyone to go through that. No one should be alone when there's someone who can help." For a moment, the room was silent. Maya looked at Keanu, a small smile on her face. "You've got a good heart," she said softly, her voice filled with understanding. Keanu smiled back at her, grateful for her support. Then he turned to Luke and spoke again. "We'll figure this out," Keanu said, his voice firm. "No matter what it takes. We'll get through this together." But even as Keanu said the words, something didn't feel right. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time a car passed outside or a branch cracked in the dark, Keanu felt a spike of anxiety in his chest. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to give up easily. Later that night, when the house was quiet and everyone had gone to sleep, Keanu stood by the window watching the street below. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. He stared out into the darkness, trying to see if anything moved. That's when he saw it. A dark figure stood across the street, barely visible in the dim light. Keanu's heart skipped a beat, and his hand reached for the phone in his pocket. But when he looked back a second later, the figure was gone, swallowed by the night. Keanu's heart raced. His instincts screamed that they were being watched, and it made him nervous. He quickly turned away from the window and glanced at Luke, who was sleeping soundly on the couch. Keanu's mind raced. Whoever these people were, they were dangerous and they weren't going to stop. The next morning, Keanu stood by the window again, still feeling that unsettling sense that someone was out there. He couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. Maya was sitting in the room with him, watching him carefully. She could see the worry in his eyes. She didn't say anything at first, but then she spoke quietly. "What's going on?" Maya asked. "You're not acting like yourself. What are you thinking?" Keanu sighed and ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation. He turned to Maya and spoke in a low voice. "We're not safe here. Whoever those people are, they won't stop until they find Luke. We can't keep hiding forever." Maya's face darkened and she nodded in agreement. "Then we need to go to someone who can help," she said. "This is bigger than just us, Keanu. If those people are part of something organized, we're going to need the authorities." Keanu felt a lump in his throat. He didn't trust the police. He had seen too many times when the system didn't help the people who needed it most. But Maya was right. This wasn't just about keeping Luke safe anymore. They needed answers. Just then, Luke stirred on the couch, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" he mumbled, his voice still sleepy. Keanu crouched down beside him, trying to sound calm. "We're figuring out what to do next, kiddo," he said, putting a hand on Luke's shoulder. "But I need you to stay strong, all right? We're going to get through this together." Luke nodded, but his eyes still looked worried. "They'll find us, won't they?" he whispered. Keanu gave him a reassuring smile, even though he was scared too. "Not if I can help it," he said firmly. Then suddenly there was a loud knock at the door. Everyone froze. Maya's eyes widened in surprise, and Luke's grip on Keanu's arm tightened. "Stay here," Keanu said quietly to Maya. "Keep Luke close. I'll check it out." Keanu walked cautiously to the door, his heart pounding. He looked through the peephole and felt a sense of relief when he saw who it was. "It's okay," Keanu called out. He unlocked the door and opened it. "It's someone I trust." Charles Foster, Keanu's longtime friend, stepped into the room. He was calm but serious, his presence strong. "Keanu," he said, his voice firm. "Maya filled me in. I came as quickly as I could." Keanu nodded, feeling a bit of relief wash over him. "Thanks for coming. I didn't know who else to call." Charles glanced over at Luke, who was sitting on the couch, still looking a little nervous. "This must be the boy," Charles said softly, smiling at Luke. "Hey there, kiddo." Luke gave a small nod but didn't say anything. Charles turned back to Keanu. "We need to move," he said, his voice serious. "I made some calls. This isn't just some small-time operation. The people after Luke are connected to something bigger, something serious." Keanu's fists clenched. "What do they want with him?" he asked urgently. Charles hesitated, like he didn't want to say it out loud. "It's not totally clear," he said quietly. "But what I've gathered is that they think Luke's parents had some important information. And now they think Luke might have it too." Maya stepped forward, her face determined. "So what do we do now?" Charles glanced between Keanu and Maya. "I have a safe place outside the city. It's hidden and secure. We can stay there while we figure out what to do next." Keanu nodded quickly. "All right. Let's go." The group moved fast, gathering only what they needed. Luke stayed close to Keanu, his small hand gripping the sleeve of Keanu's jacket. They stepped outside into the cold night. Charles led the way to an unmarked car, and soon they were driving through the empty streets. The lights of the city grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The safe house was a small cabin deep in the woods, far from the city and any danger. It was quiet, isolated, and felt like a world away from everything that had happened. Luke seemed to relax a little, but Keanu could still feel the tension in the air. That night, while Luke slept in one of the bedrooms, Keanu and Charles sat by the fire, discussing their next move. Maya joined them, worry on her face. "We need to find out what these people want," Charles said. "If we can figure out what Luke's parents were involved in, we might have a chance to stop them." Keanu nodded. "And if we can stop them, we make sure they never hurt Luke." Just then, Keanu heard a faint noise outside. He stood up, his body tense. "Did you hear that?" Charles grabbed a flashlight and nodded. "Let's go check it out." The cold night air hit them as they stepped outside. The forest was silent, the only sound was their boots crunching on the snow. Keanu's eyes scanned the trees. That's when he saw it, a figure moving in the shadows. Keanu's heart raced. "We're not alone," he whispered. Before Charles could respond, more figures appeared from the trees. They wore masks, their faces hidden. Keanu stepped forward, standing tall and ready. He wasn't going to let anything happen to Luke. Inside, Luke peeked through the window, his small body trembling. He saw the men getting closer and fear filled his eyes. "Keanu," he called out. Keanu turned to Charles. "Get them inside. Lock the doors. I'll hold them off." "You can't fight them alone," Charles said urgently. But Keanu shook his head. "I have to." As the masked figures advanced, Keanu stepped forward, his fists clenched. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Luke. Not on his watch. Not while he was still breathing. The battle wasn't over yet, but Keanu was ready to fight with everything he had, because Luke wasn't just another kid in trouble. He was family now. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.